it works.
Okay, that is now underway. And I think what Rihanna is saying is exactly right. What we'd like to do, starting with Michelle, is who can share a little bit about Ford's goals and around technology and how you're looking at this project. But because this is a little bit larger group than we've had in our first two, what we'd like to do is as we meet you, to have time for each person to share for about 5 minutes about, first of all, your work in the world, how it intersects with technology, and then some high-level reactions to the toolkit. So, and to sort of make that work best, I think we've found in the previous groups that it has been helpful to walk through the toolkit together fairly quickly, but just to remind ourselves, get back in touch with sort of how it's structured, what's in there, and then hear from each of you in one round of conversation about who you are, and also some high-level reactions to the toolkit. And then we'll be following up after today's conversation with an email, which will include a link to a sort of survey format where you can register any more detailed comments that you might have about the toolkit, in its specificity. So today we'll be really focusing at a fairly high level of sort of overarching reactions and your sense of how this might be most useful and for whom. I think, I don't know, Michelle, your sense of whether you'd like to just introduce yourself and then we can go through a little walkthrough of the toolkit.
I think it would be good for everybody to say something about themselves, including why, what their passion is and why they are interested in this. And I want to say, in the back of your minds, please consider how we may best disseminate this, what groups, what people, recognizing that what we're proposing is not part of the conventional framing, which is both its virtue and its challenge. Michelle, why don't you go?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick us off, but I want to emphasize that I have no special role here versus anyone else. So I'm happy to start off a round of introductions, but I'm just as curious to hear from everyone else. So yes, my name is Michelle. I've been at the Ford Foundation for about 4.5 years. I started there as a tech fellow, which is an internal strategic advising role. And my background is in several different roles where I really sat looking at the sort of intersection of technology change, cultural change, regulatory change, social change. So I've been a person who's been most comfortable sitting at about 50,000 feet, looking at systems change projects and sort of innovation ecosystems, and trying to often do the role of translation. So I think it's great that language has come up so quickly. I think often what we're doing in systems change work is translating across contexts and aligning on what are, if you were looking at, like, say, a third horizons framework, which some here might be familiar with, others not, like what are sort of like the vestiges of old systems that aren't working anymore that we're still sort of steeped in, and how can we try to shift ourselves into that third horizon of innovation toward a viable future. And so that means, in my work as a funder, always sort of looking across, like, whether a particular intervention is reflective of a real lever towards systems change, or whether we're talking about reform that actually shores up the status quo. And so all of this relates back to values. And the strategy that I invest in through Ford Foundation is called public interest technology. And it's all about a set of public interest values: equity, transparency, accountability. The list goes on. But how do we actually prioritize those values in the technology ecosystem, as opposed to always defaulting to dominance, growth, cost savings, efficiency narrowly defined as like speed toward a particular goal. And so there's this sort of set of you call them neoliberal or Western, or these sort of set of values that stand in as defaults, and become sort of, through technology, either entrenched or invisibilized, so that it's not even clear often that we're operating through a particular values framework, and the space to shift that values framework is often very obscured. So when I met Rian and her team and started to understand that there's this, an idea of a partnership to domination continuum or spectrum, that became to me an illuminating framework potentially for how we could make this sort of cross-sector, multi-stakeholder push to reevaluate and reprioritize the values that we're embedding in technology work a little bit more legible, and potentially connect it to things that are happening around environmental change, economic change, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm, again, sitting up here at 50,000, probably 100,000 feet in my work, looking at how we connect dots across different movements, different efforts for systems change, and across different, kind of sectors and components involved in the technology ecosystem in particular. And really, it's about, I think, at the deepest level, it's about redefining a new North Star for humanity, right? Nothing too big, just like the biggest thing ever, which is to say, like, what is our sort of project as a species on this planet? And are we going to continue to operate through this framework of extraction and domination and othering toward, say, I don't know, like, I don't mean to, assign a particular person to this, but the sort of Elon Musk vibe of leaving the planet a dried out husk and like rocketing to colonize Mars and do it all over again on another planet. Like, is that the project? Because that actually feels like it's the vision in the technology ecosystem right now. And I think if you put it in front of people and said, is that what you want to see in the next 300 years of the human species? Most people would say, no, we've got a great planet here. It's a beautiful ecosystem. Our civilization is actually dependent on partnership and interdependency and mutuality across both humans and lots of other non-human creatures and organisms. And therefore, like, we really need to have both a different vision for the future and a different set of values that are informing the way we pursue, that are informing the way we pursue our work as individuals within individual sectors and systems. So that's a lot of like big theoretical stuff, but basically I'm just excited to be here with all of you, seeing how we can bring these concepts together, this partnership domination continuum, and this fact that we know that the vision guiding sort of technology, innovation, and progress, and I put that in like really big air quotes, because I think part of what we need to do is redefine what we mean by innovation and progress. How do we bring these things together? And so I'm just excited about the opportunity to do that. And I will pause there because I could keep rambling.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That's a perfect kind of overarching view, I think, of the project and the grand project that we're all part of. So let us just take a look together at the toolkit, and then we'll be able to hear from each of the rest of you with a combination of a little bit of your introduction and also your high-level reactions to the toolkit. So I'm going to share that kit now. And we'll go down a little bit in size here. So the toolkit that we've created, and I want to really acknowledge those of you who were part of our first round of conversations last fall, that really helped us to kind of understand that our particular role at the Center for Partnership Systems in this larger work might be best to create a resource that really pulls Rian's work together in a way that's really focused around the needs of technology builders and framers. So the kit is organized around sort of 4 parts. The first piece is background and overview of the continuum. So we introduce Rian's core foundational conceptual framework, and then immediately speak to how it connects to the world of technology. And in the second area, we introduce 8 questions that emerge from Rian's work that we are encouraging technology framers and builders to be asking themselves as they do their work. And under each of those 8 questions, we've created a series of subscales where you can sort of locate where you are today on that scale and begin to think about how you might move in the direction of partnership, understanding that it's all a continuum. Then there's a little bit further discussion of each of those 8 critical questions by way of explaining sort of why are these the questions? Why is this one of the core questions that we must ask? Why is this a leverage point for the kind of whole systems change that Rian has spoken about? And then finally, there's a set of resources that relate to learning more about the partnership systems work and the broader picture of how Rian's work around technology is fitting into a broader picture of work to articulate a caring economics of partnerism and other important related issues. So in terms of the background and overview, we introduced the kind of core concept that the question before us, is that relates to technology is really whether our technology is going to be guided by an ethos of domination or partnership, and how that ethos gets embedded in the technologies that we create. So there's a review here of the kind of core configuration of the domination and partnership systems, looking at these sort of 4 elements that we can focus on to understand whether a system is oriented more toward domination or partnership. And then, as I said, there's I think 2 pages just relating to the way in which gender and the life experiences of women and children have been a blind spot in progressive movements, but are in fact a key cornerstone of, or 2 key cornerstones of shifting what it looks like to shift from domination to partnership. So those 4 cornerstones are introduced here. And then we move into those partnership domination technological scales. So the first of the 8 questions is, who is framing and building the technology? And we have a couple of subscales here where people could sort of, click into it and identify, well, I think we're kind of here. We haven't even thought about it. Or I think we're really here. We're doing great. Second,
I want to say, if I may, that one of the points about the first one is that while diversity is essential, it is really not sufficient, because we've all internalized so much of the domination system operational values. So as you see, the second part of the scale is, do the team members really value egalitarian relationships founded on mutual respect, care, responsibility, and benefit, rather than in-group versus out-group thinking? And I just wanted to emphasize that, because I think so much of the work that is being done today has focused on who is framing and building this technology. But this really takes it deeper.
Yes. So the second of the 8 questions is relates to the assumptions and narratives about human nature that are embedded in the technology. The third is what kind of social and economic relationships does this technology support? We look at power over versus power to and power with, rigid gender roles versus fluid gender categories and roles. And then what kinds of communities and workplaces does the technology support? Looking at flows of communication and use of strategies of fear versus constructive, peaceful, civil exchanges and activities. The fifth question is what gendered family and socioeconomic values are supported by the technology? We look at issues of both connecting it to economic issues, but also the core values at the heart of the technology being created. Question number 6, will this technology improve the lives of families and children and promote healthy human development? Critical question, so often left out. What kind of relationship with our natural environment is supported by this technology is the 7th question. And then does the technology use the language and thinking of domination or of partnership? So there's opportunity here to introduce some subscales relating to the use of language. And we had some really great input earlier this week around ways in which, for example, developers will talk about sort of default to the masculine he when talking about users, even when they're trying to be gender neutral in their thinking. They will say, you know, I wonder how the user he will feel about this. And we've had some other examples as well, which we'll be using to kind of elaborate on this area in some more detailed ways. So then there's, as I said, the brief discussion of each of those 8 questions. And then we move into the resource page.
And I want to add something that one of the feedback that we had on the discussion is that while each one of these, oh, you've left it already. All right, each one of them does end with what actions, you know, need to be taken. We want to really retitle this to not only be a discussion, but focus on, okay, how do we move the needle?
Yeah.
And which is implicit in all of it, but we want to make it explicit.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the very sort of quick flyover of this resource, and we would love to hear more from each of you, both by way of introduction and then whatever your sort of top level reactions or responses are. Again, remembering that there'll be a chance in the follow-up survey to register sort of more specific edits.
We really want from you because we need them. We need your specific, I mean, we want this, even though, as I said, it is not the conventional approach, we want to find connections with the user. Kate, why don't we start with you? And it would be lovely to see you if that were possible, but I know that sometimes you are elsewhere.
Yeah, I'm in a car. I had sent a note to Quincy. Earlier today saying something's come up, and so I'm actually en route to up to Richmond, actually, Virginia. So hi everyone, but great to see you, and we can have a little follow-up tete-a-tete, you and I. But
Yes.
Terrific to see everyone, and excited to be a part of this group. Albie and I actually had a chance to chat with one another, I think it was last week, so it's kind of like reunion time now. But I am CEO of Catapult X, and I'm the
Kate, you've disappeared. Kate? Oh dear, well, she may have hit a blind area.
I'm back.
You're back.
I'm
Good.
back. I'm on the road. Yeah. And so I'm CEO of Catapult X and then the editor of Women Advancing, which is part of Media Village. And it's all about supporting women rising through the ranks and leadership. The reason why I am particularly interested in this.
Kate,
Here we go.
We didn't catch why you're particularly interested.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know what's going on with this. It's hard to do while driving. So the reason why I'm particularly interested in this is that I, for a long time, have been involved in the technology space, mainly because by both media, but then also utilizing it myself as, frankly, a force for good. So with consciousness and intention. And I see have to really, and as a number of these questions bring up, think about, make sure that those who are creating the
Kate, we're having real trouble, or I'm having
looks
real
like
trouble.
those who are okay. Maybe I'll type my answer. All right.
Okay.
That's what I'm going to recommend. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I don't know about other people, but you keep going in and out. And
Yeah, that's why I'm on the road. Yeah, I'm sorry. And I can, I'll type Y, and that's easy because I don't want to be a frustration to folks. So I'll just type in the chat really quick and we can hand the baton over to someone else.
all right, well, why don't we then come back to you, Kate, and go to someone else. Actually, we thought it would be a bigger group, but quite a few people just haven't shown up.
Well, we do have quite a number of people here. Not everyone is on camera, Rion. So yeah.
Who else is on?
Well, why don't I go ahead and we have Catherine and Aiden and Albie on camera, and then we have Bobby Kia and Kate then off camera at the moment. So
I'm thinking of other people like
there are others who did register and aren't here, but we have lots of wonderful people here to hear from. So who would you like to hear from next, Rion?
I think it would be great to have Aiden talk to us a little.
Great. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm Aiden. I'm the founder and co-director of a nonprofit called Mobius, which supports people who are transitioning towards what we call liberatory technology, which is very much in line with what we're talking about here. And we define that as technology that enables all people and communities to obtain freedom, thriving, and greater access to their full aliveness. And so we're holistically resourcing people who are moving us towards that and also trying to shift the narrative. A lot of what Michelle said is very much foundational to what we believe. And our work is also supported by Michelle and Ford. And that's how I first got connected to what you all are doing here. And I've been generally sort of operating in this space in a variety of different areas for a while. So I worked in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy on developing technology programs that are specifically in service of addressing income inequality and social justice. And spent some time at Harvard Divinity School as a fellow looking at the intersection of tech ethics, spirituality, and justice. So a lot of kind of like bringing together conversations amongst different people who aren't necessarily talking to each other, but have perspectives that all, I believe, all need to be at the table if we're going to solve some of these most pernicious challenges that we face, a lot of which is fueled by technology. So it's great to be here. And I can go ahead and say, Sarah, as you said, some of my reactions to the—
Yeah, let's fold that right in with the introduction. It's just so that we make sure we hear from everybody and without needing two full rounds of getting around the table.
Perfect. So so just high level, I think it's goes without saying that it's incredibly important framing for people to be taking into account when they're designing technology and strategies related to tech. And so I love kind of the approach of people going through and asking themselves those questions within the framework categories. I did have one kind of overarching topic around specificity and possibility of having case studies, for example, so that people can really picture more, how do you apply these big concepts to things that they might be building or doing research on, or kind of, yeah, what does it look like concretely when applying these to technology? And I think that would really go a long way for making it real for people. Also along the lines of specificity, I was curious how you were defining technology within this, and are you talking entirely about digital technology, consumer-facing technology, kind of getting a little bit more specific about that, which could even just be like a little box off to the side of like defining terms. We define technology as, and technologist as blah, blah, blah. Like for us, we talk about technologists as people who have an influence over the direction of technology. They don't have to be an engineer, designer, etc. And so it might be worth specifying that. And this might be kind of opening up a whole can of worms around the framework itself, but I did really notice what feels like a big missing piece for me around racial inequity as well. And so there could be, I noticed that there are some mentions of that within lists, but specifically within the gender element of the framework, I felt that there was a lot of overlap between what we see as harmful related to gender discrimination with also what's harmful in terms of the predominantly white realities of the tech sector and the norms that are then instilled because of that too. And so I felt it would be really beneficial to have acknowledgement of that woven in a little bit more throughout, because that is so key to transforming the tech sector in the ways that we need to. So those were kind of the big things I had. I had one other quick thing around structure, which is just, I felt personally, if I were imagining myself as a user of this, that it would be really useful to have the overview of what each of the categories means actually with the category, as opposed to as a separate section, so that I wouldn't have to like switch back and forth for that full context. And yeah, those are some high level things, and congratulations on putting it together.
Well, thank you. Thank you. That was very useful. And I really love your attention to specifics. Thank you. Well, how about if we go, I don't know why I'm doing this, but if we go to Albie and see what he has to say, and Amanda.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Rianne. I think it's really interesting. Sorry, a bit more about me, although it's not very interesting, but I am a student at Columbia University and wear a few hats in finance to do with impact investing, and passionately believe in collaboration as opposed to competition. The competition doesn't have a place, but my framework and the narrative that I am interested in personally is how we've sort of got too obsessed with self-interest and the invisible hand, and with narratives around competition. And I'm interested in ways that human beings come together to collaborate. And there's another project that Amanda and I are exploring called Life is Meeting, which is a community of people that are coming together to play gracefully with ideas and to invest in companies that they care about, and to collaborate in service of building something that is a relentless force for good in the world. I can tell you a bit more about my perspective, but maybe my perspective on the toolkit, but maybe Amanda could just give you a bit of background on her.
Hi, I come from the commercial partnerships and marketing space. So my livelihood is built on doing sports sponsorships and entertainment sponsorships. And I'm in this place of wanting to do and shift that narrative a little bit. It is a heavily male dominated sector for me. And I'm trying to do kind of the work through arts and culture now, and through experiences. But at the root of it, I do believe in all the anthropological work that you guys are doing, and I'm trying to understand more and how I can then bring that back into that commercial space and change it, because I do think that people are leaning that way, but they're just not educated on that front. So curious to know how this can be then applied and then shared in those verticals and industries.
And then the question from my side is essentially, and we were just talking about this offline, like what does success look like? We get the bold vision, but it'd be good to understand what success looks like for this year, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, because this adage of people don't believe in ideas, they believe in people who believe in ideas, I think is a profound one. And I think, Rianne, we're all here because we believe in your ideas. And I'm interested to know how you think about amplifying these ideas in a very tangible and meaningful way.
Well, that is part of what the toolkit is actually about, isn't it? Is spreading a different perspective, a different worldview. And I think, Amanda, you've also put your finger on it, that again, if we don't look at the foundations, then we are just adding band-aids really to a system that is proving more and more visibly dysfunctional. So, so what you are suggesting is that we add, Albie, if I hear you correctly, something about what does success look like?
I don't believe that, again, there's this adage of what gets measured gets managed, right? And I think not everything, you quoted Einstein earlier, like not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that can't be counted doesn't. And so I don't think you necessarily need to say like, these are all the things that we're going to do. And if we don't do it, it's not a success, because there's lots of meaningful work that can happen outside of sort of measurable things. But it would be good to understand like the roadmap, I guess is what I'm saying, for this work, so we can, try and support where possible in the direction that you see is, success.
Well, I think that we have been talking, and forgive me, my cell phone keeps ringing, and I don't want to take time to deal with it and turn it off. We've been talking, as you know, because we are at the Center for Partnership Systems working on new metrics that, for example, show the value of the work of caring for people, starting at birth, and caring for our natural life support systems. And we've been talking about how to integrate that. And I think that would be a good way to perhaps really have an additional question about what kind of values govern business and economics, because technology is embedded in larger systems. So perhaps we need an additional question. But Amanda, you were going to say something, I saw it.
Oh, I think coming from the event space, I work in creating events and experiences to tap on emotions and these sorts of values that bring people together. I'm always leaning on how can we take this research and a framework and apply that into an experience, because I truly believe that learned, like things are learned through shared experience. You can give me as much research as you want, data points and a toolkit and a framework, but until it's tangible to me and I've actually gone through it, I may not actually see it. It is very good in practice, and I believe in the work, I really do. And I think I'm just coming from a, how do I make this work other than tangible, so that someone can actually see that these values are better and quantifiable in some ways.
I love
Like,
to have a conversation with you about that, because I don't see this as the end of the project. I see this as really the beginning.
Absolutely, I agree. And I did read your book and I love it, and that's why we're on the. Actually, that was the book that Albie gave me. And so,
Which book
the
is
chalice
that?
and the blade. The chalice and the blade.
Oh, the Chalice
The
and the Blade, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually, I wanted to be a cultural anthropologist when I was a child, and my parents were like, "I'm not paying for you to go to school to be poor." So I ended up in business and in marketing because that was the closest way that I could get to it. But unfortunately or fortunately, I've gone the other way and was selling human behavior through strategy in marketing to get people to buy things. And I'm in this personal cultural revolution and trying to go back to my roots, which is why the work is so important to me. And of course, like knowing what I know of my past and my profession, it's like, how can we adapt and change that? And that's why I'm very interested in this work.
Well, let's figure out what our next steps can be in terms of, as you put it, events and experiences. Because I agree with you that, I mean, we put in a lot of time and a lot of effort in just putting together the toolkit. But I agree with you that the question now, the next question really is implementation. And that requires, well, I'd love to hear your ideas, and maybe Michelle, if you're interested, which I think you probably are, we can discuss that with Albie and with Ananda. What do you think?
Sure.
Okay, good show.
can I say one more thing
Please.
to do with a potential question? There is a massive distance at the moment between what a business sells and the business model, right? You could argue Facebook is selling connection, it's selling partnership, it's selling togetherness, but the business model, which is predicated on attention, is what actually defines what the business does, right? You can say something, but the business model is actually what makes the business. And so I'd be interested to have a question in there about business model.
Yeah.
Because I think you can say this is what my business does, but what your business model is actually an indication of how you use technology.
Yeah, and I'm afraid that the business model for Facebook, etc., is to get the adrenaline going and to sell.
Right.
And
Famously, Mark Zuckerberg answered a US congressperson's question of like, what's your business model, by saying, Senator, we sell ads. But that's, to Albie's point, that is a big distinction from the hype around Facebook, which if you watch a commercial for Portal or any of their other products, is like, it's about connection. It's about, memories. It's about networks. And so that's so counter to actually their business is to divide us into, quantifiable communities of consumers who can be more accurately targeted for ads. So I think that's such an important point. And it dovetails with this side chat that's happening in the chat, which is really about the kind of like distance between this sort of utopian tech hype that goes along with every tech innovation, and the distance between that and like what the technology is actually doing. So Aiden has brought up a point that it's like you almost need to get people before they can sit down and honestly start answering these questions. You might have to meet them where they are, which might be that they've, and to be working at Facebook right now, you would have to have bought into some of that hype in order to kind of sleep at night. And so like, you have to meet somebody where they are, which might be that they think that they're working for a company that's doing XYZ, but actually like they have to be led to understand that there are, deeper underlying, it's all about clarifying the deeper underlying values framework, right?
And that is really the only way to change that business model, okay, is to change these 4 cornerstones. And that is the problem. That if we, I mean, I'm not saying that we don't need some short-term actions like changing, for example, corporate charters, okay? But how to change them, that depends really on the foundational values, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And back to
Yeah.
gender, I mean, to this hidden system of gendered values.
Yeah.
The in-group versus out-group thinking, that just having a model of our species in which the fundamental difference in form between female and male is so stereotyped, so that number one, there's nothing in between, and number two, it is a given that the masculine dominates, is superior, the feminine is inferior, the masculine dominates, controls, the feminine is subservient, the masculine is served, and then the feminine serves, and that's a template which is a constant, whether it's in Nazi Germany, Khomeini's Iran, the Taliban, it doesn't really matter. It is a constant, that connection between why do these regimes really insist on either maintaining or going back to a highly punitive, rigidly male-dominated authoritarian family? Or why did Putin, for example, radically a few years ago reduce the penalties for family violence? Because they get the connection between what happens in families and what happens in the state or tribe. And these are the connections we want people to see. And it's not easy, is it?
Excuse me, Rand, may I make a comment? This is Bobby Kia.
Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna suggest that we hear from Bobby and from Catherine, and then come back to more of the exciting conversation that's happening in the chat, and once we've heard from each person, be able to then start to do another, keep going with the conversation that's wanting to emerge, but making sure that we hear from Bobby and from Catherine. So Bob,
Awesome.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Well, my name is Bobby Kia. I live in LA here. I'm also a member of the Nexus community, which is how I know Albie. And I love everything Rand's been, obviously, I think, and what Michelle, you said about the North Star, I think the way I think about that is sort of climate and, human homeostasis, right? And equilibrium. And clearly we're out of balance, both economically, politically, socially, environmentally. And so I do I think it's relatively convenient to think of that as a North Star. But, from one of the hats I wear on the board of my family's foundation, the Semnani Family Foundation out of Salt Lake City, Utah, is precisely what you were articulating, Michelle, around, the need for funders to be catalytic towards this discussion being ultimately then adopted. And I think we want to be able to mobilize the funding community who understands the importance of this narrative to support the adoption of some early kind of first mover champions, if you will, who can then help, carry this torch. And as you said, disseminate that information, and then ultimately have that seep into sort of like the university ecosystems or the innovation ecosystems And ultimately, as Albie said, seep into business models when we think it, and that's another area I focus on, is really lab to market to scale technology deployment. And I spent many years working at the World Bank, and I work at that intersection at the moment, with the real lens towards climate and social justice. And so I think there's a need to really coordinate on this message, and then, like everyone's been saying, find some really clear winners that are, or rather early adopters who are interested in having this narrative win in the global debate. And last comment I'd say is, I think we've pointed to all this because I think there's been a scarcity mindset. There's been this rivalrous, Schmachtenbergian mindset of there's not enough, and so therefore we need to be more aggressive and territorial. But once you realize that actually there's trillions of dollars of more value there that we haven't even accounted for yet, it does sort of shift that perspective. So I think there is some hope in being able to educate people around the abundance out there in partnership.
I love that, Bobby, and you've disappeared again. But I won't comment too much because I do want us to hear from Catherine, but I'd like to get back to what you were talking about, okay? And last but certainly not least, Catherine.
Thank you, Rianne. What a great group. I was delighted to show up and recognize folks. It's like fun to be seeing these faces and hearing these voices. So number of points I wanted to make have already been made, but I want to underscore a few. I'm Catherine. I sometimes describe myself as a recovering academic. I'm a former political scientist. I taught political philosophy. My area was actually the intersection of storytelling in the public sphere, especially as it applies to women and the family. So it was like through the gender lens of how we conceptualize who gets to participate in the public sphere economically, technologically, politically, socially. I then ended up, and this is why part of this conversation is so interesting to me, I've built a number of technological products, actually. I've been a founder a number of times, venture-backed and otherwise. I was head of content at Disney Interactive and had charge over its digital products and platforms, its websites, its games, its apps facing women, kids, and families. And built one myself after leaving Disney for Gen Z female creators. So I've been around the block a few times on both the side of building the technology, being the technologist, also being the philosopher of technology and the narrative elements within technology, and then also continue to serve as an advisor to a number of what I would describe as ethical tech companies, primarily in the care, mental health, wellness, life services space. And, if it's not evident, with a very, very particular interest in the impact on gender, on women, girls, and the family, and non-binary, and the queer community. My biggest piece of feedback was something that Aidan actually brought up, which is that the way that, and the questionnaire, the survey toolkit, it is really, really great. But I think that the way it's written right now, it's not going to capture the nuance in many of the companies where it needs to be applied. So Aidan used the example of Facebook. I can tell you from having gone through part of an acquisition process with Facebook that like so many members of that community, from like the most senior level to the lower level, would probably answer many of those questions on the scale of partnership. Right? Like they would, that they would apply the partnership narrative to what they're doing. They would make a distinction between the business imperatives of what they're doing and the technological imperatives of what they're doing. And that distinction in itself is problematic. And there needs to be more sort of education and attention paid to how those things go together, because it is the impulse of many innovators and builders and product developers and founders to hold them in separate hands, right? It's right there in the language of technology. We still talk about users, right? Rather than communities and collaborators. And, the conflation of many of these terms, this is stuff that Aidan knows really, really well, probably better than any of us, is kind of at the heart of where there's just a tremendous amount of unconscious bias. So at Disney as well, if you put this in front of any of the developers of any products within Disney Digital, they would say, yeah, we're good. Right? Like, we tick off the right boxes here. And so I think there's work to be done in thinking through what's the potential for some deeper critical tools. It may require some outside analysis. Aidan made a really great suggestion about, are there some third-party requirements here or recommendations to make? I would also say there's an opportunity, though, to treat this as the educational process that it is, that there is an opportunity in working through the toolkit to look at, here is actually how you unpack a response to this survey in an honest way. Like, here is how you ask yourself the hard questions. So your impulse might be to check over here, right? Like, partnerism has the beautiful little icon in the end, and there's sad trombone over here. How do I resist the urge to give myself full marks when when there's so many ways of interpreting what those full marks could look like? And there are a number of things that are important, I think, that others have brought up. One, again, is that conflation of the business and the product imperatives. That there are other interesting folks. You may have already spoke to some of the folks from Zebras Unite, a number of the folks that are doing interesting work in sort of collective stakeholding in building technological businesses and technological organizations that are really challenging the assumptions around the model of unicorns and the model for scale. Bobby brought this up, the funding question. Funders as technologists in this narrative are crucially important. I can tell you from painful firsthand experience that you can build with the very, very, very best intentions, but if your investors are not on board in the right way, and that can be very, very hard to gauge and evaluate early on, then the best intentions, like, you can have all the true honest answers at the right side of the scale, but the best intentions won't get you very far. So I guess those would be the two top line things, would be that I think there's an opportunity to push on what would be required to get the honest responses and to get like the right degree of self-interrogation and self-analysis from participants. And then some work in thinking about really who are the stakeholders in this exercise, right? Founders, engineers, employees, funders, the community members, quote unquote, users, like, who are the stakeholders, that we would look to and saying, how do we most robustly evaluate these things and dig into the work of not just reframing the stories that we're telling around them, but also the way that we're thinking about them and that we're making assumptions about what we're doing in these spaces. And I will pause there because I also can go on at some length.
Well, Catherine, I'm so glad that you said what you did, because we, I guess, tried to make it, we skirted the issues that you are bringing up, which is really the business model.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in a nutshell, and we really can't. And that's what I'm hearing from all of you, and bless you. How we do this without sounding preachy and judgmental, that is a challenge, because we don't want people to say bad, we're saying we're bad, right? And I would really love to hear from you, but I want to get back to something that Bobby said, which is the scarcity mentality. The truth of the matter, as I elaborate in The Real Wealth of Nations, which is my book on economics, domination economics, which go back, it isn't just capital, neoliberalism. I mean, it's sheiks and it's pashas and it's Chinese emperors, there's a long lineage here, feudalism, but it artificially creates scarcity. And we really have to understand that. And maybe that really should be part of the toolkit. How does it do that? Well, for one thing, it channels resources into weapons, into wars, which we all know. But for another thing, it channels resources to the top, but it fails to invest in the most important contributors to an economy, which are people. You know, what economists like to call human capital. So the whole system, it's like you were talking about, Amanda, about the chalice and the blade. I have 2 chapters in there about reality stood on its head. And what we're talking about is setting reality right side up. And hopefully this can be one of the tools. But as I said, I think it's just the beginning. I'm going to, we have about 22 minutes, and I'd like to come back to people who have, I mean, I'd like to read, for example, what Kate wrote to all of us, which is, where is it? And I really love, I mean, by the way, you haven't really met Quincy, and I would like to introduce her because she's a member of our team and a wonderful member of our team who brings a younger, shall we say, perspective to so much of it, and who has created some wonderful graphics, by the way, for our website. So thank you, Quincy, for joining us. But I am going to really go to what Kate wrote, and then let's go on. And I can't find Kate.
I think what Kate was saying when we lost her was that it's important for the teams developing technology to reflect the people who are impacted by those technologies, which is like, you know, a founding tenet, I think, of this kind of work. And it might be helpful to, you know, at all of these comments are making me think that it might be helpful to have some sort of upfront activity that just kind of orients people to not just the partnership to domination continuum, but this, like, you know, like even just saying like we're in a moment of rapid technological change, right? Language is a technology, fire is a technology. We're not just talking about data and algorithms here. That happens to be the dominant flavor of the technology conversation today, but it's like helping people orient themselves to like, when are we in time as a species dealing with technology? Who am I as an individual within the scope of influence that I have in my own organization? And then like, how can I see myself as nested within a series of more structural or systemic issues that I may or may not have agency to impact? Like even just a kind of like upfront activity to help people determine their own positionality in the ecosystem could be really useful in getting at a lot of this feedback. But I also want to flag that I think Albie and Amanda have had their hand raised for a while. And then maybe we can get
I love your comments, Michelle. And Quincy, I hope that you can preserve and perhaps also send out the sidebar, which has some really important thoughts in it, including those of Michelle, but everyone.
Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you. And I didn't really realize, because Catherine and I have been focusing on something else in our conversations, how deep you are in this area. So I'm so glad that you joined us.
We have so many other exciting conversations, Rhiannon, that the side of it gets lost sometimes.
I know. But
Albie, did you want to come back to the hand that you were raising earlier?
Yeah, I was actually just trying to do thumbs up to what Bobby said about abundance. But just to say, I think that scarcity narrative is so dominant, right? And it drives competition, it drives domination, and renewable energy sources, I think, speak to the fact that we can think about regenerative agriculture, regenerative energy systems. And I think that seems to me to be like a node that if you can unpack that narrative, it can feed nicely into what we're talking about here. And only other thing I wanted to say, which I think speaks to what Catherine was just saying, was Brian Stevenson from the Equality Justice Initiative, I think, was speaking at a conference I was at last week, and he was really encouraging people to get proximate, that get close to your beneficiaries. And I think there's something to that around grant making and around what we're trying to do around technology. It's like, how well do you know your customer, I guess? And to, I think, Catherine's point again, like, why are we calling them users and not, you know, beneficiaries or people that we're serving? Because that's what technology should do. It should serve us towards an outcome that, you know, we want collectively.
Can I jump on the scarcity point? Because I think that it's an absolutely crucial piece of the broader cultural narrative, right? That we culturally, most people believe they live in a zero-sum game, right? And that if other people have more, they're going to have less. I would argue that that's not as persistent or dominant a narrative for people who are building technologies and companies. That it's not that I feel like I won't get enough if I don't succeed, if I don't become a unicorn. It's just that I want to be the winner, right? Like I want to own my category, right? I want to be successful. There's a lot of narrative, especially with blockchain and crypto and NFTs and DAOs. Like there's a lot of narrative out there right now that I would argue is appropriating some of the language of being generative and being collectivist, and it's getting competitive. Right. It's, you know, Andrew Horowitz, which is one of the leading venture capital firms, you know, in Silicon Valley, is all about this generative building language and think about the community and think about the collective. But they're doing that because they want to be the best, right? That they want to be the leader in their category. So I would argue that in the space of technologists broadly defined, the thing to tackle is the competition narrative. It is what does it mean to dominate a space? And this goes back to what you were saying, Michelle, about what exercises might be. I actually think a good exercise in any of these conversations is, how do you know if you're being dominating? Right? You might be a dominator and not know it, right? So what are the indicators? What might you look at? Like we might think that this is part of the language right now, narratives of healthy capitalism, right? It's like you can be capitalist and you can be competitive, you know, and you can want to be the big player on the stage, but you can also be purpose driven. How do we parse the distinctions so that somebody actually, you know, whether it's an organization or an individual, where do they fit on the scale? And what are the things that they might be doing that are dominating, that are playing into the narrative of dominance that they don't quite realize?
Piggybacking on that for a moment, I wonder if I think part of what Catherine's pointing to is that, like, really examining this in yourself is it's deep personal work too. And we have a lot of forces pushing us towards seeing ourselves on one side of the spectrum, as Catherine also spoke to before. And so I wonder about some exercises that are in there, some resources that really have to do with some of that self-reflection as something that you're doing kind of going into this kind of thing, especially if you're thinking about it as it relates to yourself and the things that you're building, as opposed to third parties who are like keeping companies accountable. And then I also want to just like underscore what Catherine said about the importance of investors and possibly investors using this kind of a toolkit as they are evaluating companies. And there are increasingly investors that are values aligned and want to be supporting alternatives that really have foundations that are values based, although, as Catherine said, they're hard to find, but increasingly out there. And there's a lot of what I hear from some of those folks is that there's a lot of learning to be done and a feeling of kind of a lack of sometimes where to start or how to know what to prioritize. So that could be another potential audience for you all that could be powerful.
Mm-hmm. And could I offer one more thing? I'm sorry, now I'm being dominating towards the end of this. I think they're actually good models. Aiden, you brought up the question of intersections of race. I actually think they're really good models for these sorts of exercises in racial awareness work. A lot of the work that helps white people identify their participation in white supremacy. I think that there's interesting stuff around how do you understand when you're complicit in a system, right? How can you identify the places in which you are unconsciously contributing to a system of dominance? You might do all the right things on paper, but if there's this, that, and the other, you're still part of the problem if you're not actively working against things. So it might be worth looking at some of those models, around how to do that kind of deep work around understanding our own complicity, in these systems that could be useful here.
That's a very important thing that we really should add to the, because it all boils down really to individual agency when you come right down to it. And, but I think that well, there's so many take homes from all of this. I don't even know where to begin to absorb all of it. But I don't want to, I really want to keep hearing from all of you at this point. And Bobby, you keep disappearing and appearing. I want to get back to what you said about really funding the dissemination and the education of a new way that we can show actually is in both human and economic terms much, much more viable, sustainable, humane, and in that sense successful. And I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that. Well, maybe Bobby has.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Thank you, Rianne. Yeah, I think the way I was thinking about it was perhaps in partnership with a university, but finding sort of like an anchor institution that would approach this from a almost academic, but with an eye towards application perspective, and then allow funders to kind of play that role in bridging that gap through access to not just capital, but strategic sort of partnerships, perhaps on the corporate side, where there could be a few either early stage or later stage companies that might want to be involved and fundamentally create a multi-sector partnership there that could be funded by a consortium of family foundations, but also funded in kind through academic resources and human capital.
Well, how would you operationalize that, Bobby?
I think we'd probably set up a working group or a committee to handle the coordination effort. You're right. The challenge here is basically coordinating, as Catherine said, at each of the underlying stakeholders. So subsequent to a stakeholder mapping, we could find committees we could find members to join a committee to then organize and coordinate that group.
I think that's an excellent idea, and I invite you to be part of that committee, as well as some of the other people here. Alvi and Amanda, Michelle, Catherine, Aiden. I think that that would be an excellent outgrowth of this, is as a second stage.
A different approach could be finding infrastructure that's already emergent where this could plug into. And I'm thinking of things like, I have mixed feelings about this, but just to note that it's happening, Center for Humane Tech, which is the group that did the Social Dilemma film, which was so successful, like they're now launching a course which walks people through, like 6 or 7 different modules. I think it's launching this week, so this might be like public information online now, but they've got 6 different modules. One of them's like centering a values framework. One of them is like fairness and justice, like understanding fairness and justice. And they're trying to do a better job than they did with the Social Dilemma to bring some citational justice into that work, in terms of actually referencing, honestly, the women of color who have been leading that field for many, many years. That said, it's like they have a mailing list of 150,000 people who signed up to hear from them following the social dilemma, who now that becomes a channel for them to advertise their course. And after people finish this course, which they've had, 100 people go through a beta, and 100% of them gave it really high marks and were excited to dig in on follow-on resources. Like, one of the things I have to do as their funder is make sure that they're then routing people to follow-on opportunities, adjacent, learning, training, education opportunities that can then deepen their, so that becomes an entry point to something like this, or to, Aiden's Mobius Liberatory Tech Fellowship, or they have to be, they've like it or not, they had this super successful movie, and now they need to be doing a better job of connecting out to additional, relevant work in the ecosystem. So that's very emergent, but they're one of, 15 things that I know about that are trying to build. Aiden's turned me on to the fact that there's something called the Trust and Safety Professionals Association in the tech industry that's networking people who work on content moderation and other aspects of platform trust and safety. So there's all these emergent pieces of infrastructure that I think could be potentially lower hanging fruit than setting up a dedicated or siloed effort around this in particular, when I think we're recognizing in this conversation that this is, this bites off one piece, and it's a piece that's about your own individual awakening and journey toward, but situating within this really broad domination to partnerships continuum, which I think is illuminating, obviously in technology, but beyond that. So it's you've got this really important piece of an intervention, but how does it then get networked across this constellation of emergent, because this stuff is also very emergent, how does it get networked effectively into a constellation of efforts that can speak to some of the more structural pieces, or that get to that layer of, who's actually funding the technology through what frameworks.
Could I ask a question? So in the first instance, who would be receiving the toolkit or the questionnaire? Is it, you just used the word individual, is it an individual founder, engineer, head of engineering?
Well, this is one of the things that we want your input on. Who are the people who would be receptive to both using and or disseminating it? I mean, Michelle has answered the question in a very big way, in the sense of finding an emergent organization to incorporate it. That would be tremendous, frankly, to have them and fine tune it for their use. Because what we are offering is really a start.
I think we have a hand from Albie, and then want to acknowledge that Aiden had to jump off, and we thank her for her wonderful contributions. But go ahead, Albie.
I'm just going to say, what better way to prove the partnership, the partnership domination continuum, but particularly the power of partnership, than, rather this being a siloed effort, a partnership effort to push this forward. And it was really, and I don't mean to derail the conversation, but I couldn't contain my curiosity, given I had actually just written down the Center of Humane Technology, and Michelle said that she had mixed views, and I was just curious what those mixed views were.
Oh, well, basically when the film came out, there was, in the community that I'm funding, there was a backlash, basically, because the film was kind of tech bros discover justice. That was the vibe, was tech bros discover their own blind spots. And yet there's been, as I said, women of color mainly, but a movement to address these, to illuminate and address these issues for well over a decade, and you could argue more 50 years. And so the fact that the film, I'll use the term Columbus, in the sense it was we're here, we've discovered these issues, we're doing it all wrong. was kind of like, yep. And there's been people trying to tell you that for a long time. So, you know, it was a hugely effective tool in terms of getting the word out to a public community that hasn't been deeply steeped in these issues, but it alienated the community of civil society actors largely, but also scholars who have been working to illuminate and address those issues for a long time. So as a funder, you know, I inherited, you know, a grant relationship with them when I came into a program officer role, and just felt like that is where we need to dig in, is like, you have now positioned yourself as, you know, in a particular place in this ecosystem, and that needs to become a bridge to this field, this ecosystem of efforts that have been, you know, working on this for a long time, and some of which have been really effective. And I just
say one more thing, because this goes to the to the possibility of working groups and partnership ecosystems around this, or ecosystems of partners around this. That the other weakness of the social dilemma, we had many good qualities. I know the filmmaker Jeff, and they were very well intentioned, but it also goes to that there's so much fantastic work that's already being done in evaluating sort of the moral and ethical questions around tech itself, right? From the point of view of who is using it, who's it for, et cetera. The broader, I think where partnership, Rianne's models really provide the most important differentiator is in pointing to the systems that get in the way, like especially the economic system, because many of the activists in ethical tech will tell you, you all know this, I'm sure, that we can talk around and around and around about how to build better products. But if there's no market for those products, if there's no funding for those products, if there is no support for those products, there's amazing stuff that's being generated and built all the time. And then it dies on the vine because it doesn't get funded. It doesn't get supported. The investors don't support it. I would say that any working group would have to include representatives of venture capitalists, would have to include economists, right? People leading MBA programs. The side of like, what is the business of tech is the thing that gets in the way of so many of the conversations of how to use tech to build a better world and how to mitigate the negative effects for tech that doesn't.
I think that takes us right back to the whole issue of the worldview, which is what informs the values that govern the business model. And it takes us back to the four cornerstones, because that is how that worldview is maintained. It's a circular kind of process. Well, I have one question too for Bobby. When you were talking about a university, did you have one in mind that you are connected with that would be interested? Because I think that universities are still teaching for the past to a very large extent. And, you know, like what university would be willing to take a chance on a...
Yeah. In fact, I have we work closely with the University of Utah, our family does, but there's a friend of mine, Navroop Sadev, who might be familiar with some on the call, that runs a program in connection with MIT's, I think it's called Connection Sciences Lab. But it actually might be an appropriate type of partner for something like this. But you know, the other thing I'd say is we have a partnership with a group called Benefunder that, you know, cuts across a lot of different universities, and I think there could be a survey, you know, done, and you know, just to kind of find out.
Well, what I'm really getting out of this is the need for this group, which is right here, including you and Albi and Amanda, and of course Catherine, to really bring, and Michelle, obviously, because she's so really committed to this. And we're trying to bring Ford on board to invest more, frankly, in the education project that we're talking about. But I think maybe we should plan to have a meeting of this group centering around next steps, if that seems like a good idea to all of you.
Well, I would propose that we remind everyone that we are in fact meeting again on the 21st to take next steps, not only with this group, but also with members, with participants from the other two groups that we met with this week. So it's a little bit broader circle, and really the emphasis on Monday the 21st will be on reflecting back what we've learned from all of you, and then also opening up this conversation with even those additional players around next steps. And so I think that's the first next step. And it may be that after that, a group grows that might have membership from across those different small groups we held this week that could continue that conversation.
Amir Benafonte and John Havens, they'd be good people to also involve in all of this. I mean, I'm just thinking of the two of them off the top of my head.
Yes, and I mean, we've spoken all week with, or across the three sessions, with people who are very committed from different angles and have different networks. And we want to make best use of all of that. For the session on the 21st starts at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And in the follow-up email you'll get just after this, though, there's a link where you can sign up to be part of that, and then you'll get the calendar invite. And Quincy's kindly put that in the chat just now, so you can grab it from there as well.
Well, my God, we are 4 minutes over, which I think you've been kind enough to stay for that. Are there any final comments or thoughts?
I mean, I just threw something in the chat. It's definitely way too big of a wrench to solve in our -4 minutes remaining, but like there's a clear thing standing out for me still in the framework, which is that on the partnership side, we haven't actually transcended the problematic gender binary that is so foundational to the domination side. And so I think, anyone, and I don't mean to make this an age thing, but I think anyone under the age of 40 is going to look at this and be like, this is not reflective of where we are as a society. And I think in 10 years, this will appear like pretty dramatically outdated. So that's like one place to just press. I mean, it's the language and the framing, like we need to transcend that a little bit more.
I agree with you, Michelle. We kind of put it in some of the sub questions, but maybe it should be really a question in itself, because like race, it is part of the real conversation that's happening right now. So it is, of course, overarching the whole gender issue. And I think maybe we can reframe that question.
It's even in the framework, when you have partnership and domination side by side, like there's like a row where it just doesn't there's no transcending the binary. You talk about the problematic binary set up on the domination side, but then we're still talking about men and women as if that actually reflects the spectrum that we see in the world, and it does not anymore.
You're absolutely
Probably
right.
never did.
Let's talk about fixing that. Okay.
And blind spot also is now not a term that is accepted. It's considered ableist. So I just, this is always the language.
Oh my God.
Is a moving target.
What do we call it? Other than blind spot.
I know. I mean, there's literal, you can Google and find like blog posts on like what we have to say instead of blind spot. Cause I off the top of my head, I can't come up with like the best one, but people have been doing that work.
Okay. Well, this is something for Quincy and me to talk about, right? Thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate that. Yes, Aldi.
No, I was just saying goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for spending the time. This was so illuminating and wonderful to meet all of you.
All right. Well, I hope to see all of you at the next bigger meeting. I hope you'll all be there.
Thanks,
Thank
Rhian.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Lovely to meet you all. Thanks for spending your time.
And it was wonderful to meet you, Amanda. I'm glad you came.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Well, I am beginning to feel a little overwhelmed, but very good feedback.
Yeah.
The question is, what do we do with it?
Well, the first thing we do is to really, is to give people the survey. And so we have all, what I think we want to do as an overarching approach is to have all of the streams of feedback in front of us and let Quincy and me organize them a little bit around kind of categories. Here's what we heard about the introduction. Here's what we heard about the scales. Here's what we heard about the, things that are missing or the discussion, all of those. We've heard ideas that take us in all different directions. So if we Quincy and I on Monday and Tuesday next week will be grouping those things together. We probably won't have all of the detailed survey responses until Wednesday. I asked for them back by Wednesday, and we probably need to do a reminder on Monday, just as a note to Quincy to remind me that to just, jog people to take the time to do that. But then, then we'll have to sort of, I think, sift through and looking at the sort of piece by piece, and then more intuitively, holistically, what are the big things that we can change. So I think the categories are sort of, let me start this way. I don't think that by the 21st, we have to have a revised toolkit to give everybody. What I think we need is by the 21st is a PowerPoint set of slides that says, here's what we learned from you. And that goes through the key highlights of what we learned across the three groups, and then has a section that says, and here's how we think it's going to change the resource itself. Mm-hmm. Give some, or they could go both side by side on slides, what we and how it's going to change it. And then spend the bulk of our time saying, here's the 5 topics that came up that we want more conversation about, or here's a couple topics we'd like more conversation about, and then let's focus our time on the questions of strategy for implementation. And so I think that's where we want to be, a week from Monday. And then we'll have to actually do the work of revising the resource. But I don't think we have to do that in order to have the conversation on the 21st. That's my sense.
Well, I think it's more practical, but I do think we need to pay attention to what Michelle said about our graphics.
Well, it's about the language. It's not the graphic.
Well, but it is about the language in the website and the graphics.
Yeah.
And that is really urgent because, for example, we have to transcend the binary, and yet it is really true that combination systems have these stereotypes that are associated. It is on the partnership side that we have to, and I'd like to, if you can bring up the PowerPoint for a moment of the graphics. I think we better do that, and also look for another word for blind spot. My God, I never thought of that.
Me neither.
Yeah. Well, and I think rather than, I don't have time right now to edit that. I think we're going to be doing so much editing globally. I don't want to get overly detailed right at this moment, but I think that it will be part of the set of suggestions that we bring forward.
Yeah.
I think that's the work for right this minute.
Well, I would like to, if you don't mind, Quincy, and if you have time.
I actually have to leave in like 3 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, then you don't.
Yeah.
But I would like to address the question of the gender binary in our website, especially the graphics.
We will be sure that
And we can,
does
Make
not
that a
get
priority.
lost
So
in
when
the,
am I talking to you again? Because I don't think I have.
we set a 2-hour meeting for Wednesday, starting at 11.
And I emailed Leah, so she said she would talk to you about it.
But wait a minute, what time to what time?
11 to 1.
11 to 1. On the 16th, we're talking.
That's right. And then we set a second time on Friday, the 18th.
Second, 11 to 1. But could we perhaps talk about just Quincy, you and I, about the graphics on Monday? Like
Well,
at a-
on Monday and Tuesday, Quincy and I need to be collating all of this feedback so that we can really make use of it. And I'd rather do that whole process before we make any of the, and then just do the,
right?
I think it'll be more effective if we make the changes holistic
Yeah.
after we've collated all of the.
And I this over the weekend, I can think of some language that we could change our binary language to.
All right. And also the question of the darn blind spot, what do we call it? My God. So
Yeah,
we-
we'll look at that as well.
Okay. And what was the other day?
On Friday, the 18th,
Yeah,
we set the time of 2 o'clock.
all right.
And because at that point we'll have slides to review for Monday.
All right. Okay, excellent. Well, I am feeling my age.
Well, this has been, I mean, I think we have to just give ourselves some good acknowledgement that we got this far.
Yeah.
A lot. And you have talked to so many people, Rian, and done, you know, so much work to pave the way to even be able to have these small group conversations. And I think the quality of the people who showed up and their willingness to participate is really a testament to how, you know, invested they are in your vision and in this work. So this is, I mean, I think it's tremendous that we've gotten this far. And now we'll do a good job of kind of looking, you know, looking at all of the feedback and pulling forward the pieces that we can act on in the shorter term and things that we need to be thinking about as longer term
Yeah.
ideas.
Okay, well, I thank you both so much. And on the last meeting, let's start with some brief introductions of you and Quincy.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I'm always sort of doing it in the middle of things.
Okay.
It's worked out. I mean, it's
Yeah.
worked out fine.
Yeah.
About that. All right. Well, thank you both. Have a wonderful weekend. How's your dad doing, Quincy?
He's okay. I'm about to get on a call with these two other doctors.
I hope he'll do the surgery. My God.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really hard, isn't it? Okay, well,
Yeah, we should feel proud. I feel proud. I think that was a tough group, like in terms of, you know, that's very much the tech side, Silicon Valley, like venture capitalist side. Brought me back to my childhood. But you know what I mean? I think we should be really proud and in terms of, you know, changing the language and that stuff. Like, I think Michelle is very, very woke in terms of, like, I have a lot of friends that are very, very on it, and I've never really heard the blind spot thing. And so I think that's, you know, she's very, I think it's great that we have that feedback, because that'll be huge in just making sure that, you know, our language does stay relevant and stuff. But language is always changing, you know, so.
Yeah.
But our
Right.
ideas are really good.
well, thank you. Well, we have to get forward to invest in the second stage. And I like the connection with Amanda, because I think the second stage are actual meetings. but if we could do it with this group that Michelle is connected with.
The second stage to me isn't clear yet. And I think we should wait until we've really kind of looked at, because I think we also will get more conversation about exactly that question on the 21st. So I think we want to stay in a pretty open place about what that strategy is going to look like. It might be a 3-pronged strategy. Nancy has some ideas, other people have other ideas. So I think we want to not on the 21st commit to a strategy, but again, be taking in all the ideas so that we can decide what is the strategy that we think Ford will fund, we think CPS has the capacity to pursue, and who of the people in these groups are the people that can help propel us in those directions. So because I think there's so many different options for us actually, and I look forward to hearing more on the 21st from people about your exact question, Rian, to Bobby, when you said, well, how would you operationalize that? I think that's the question we can be asking on the 21st and kind of have their help in fleshing out, okay, that strategy would look kind of like that. That strategy would look kind of like that. And then we can be in a position of choice rather than making commitments in the moment.
Well, it depends on who.
I'm so sorry. I have to take this call.
Please do, Quincy. Be well.
Bye, thank you.
All right.
Well, thank you both so much.
You're very welcome. And we'll see you next week, and we'll keep in touch as we are working through all this material.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.